Wedge to come forward. I think you're providing the background. This is just in terms of process, this paper is an information paper. We didn't want to, not disclose the fact that we want to be very open about the fact that we're dealing with this issue today, but necessarily because the property's going to auction next week, I think it's right and appropriate that we have the discussion about dollars and cents in an environment which doesn't show our hand, as it were. So from a commercial point of view, it's appropriate that we do that. But we did want people to know the story, because I think the story that sits in behind this provides a better explanation for our shared history. And it's an important part of our history. So, Russell, if I could hand over to you, we'll deal with the receipt of the information. Councillors may have some questions that are appropriate to the information that's being received, and then we'll go into PX to discuss the decision paper that's been put in front of us.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say a few words about the Red House. For nearly 200 years, Maori and non-Maori have had a connection with Takapaniki. In the 1920s, Takapaniki was a trading village for flax fibre with ships from Europe, America and Sydney. In 1839, the first Red House was built in Takapaniki, which is what the bay was named after, the Red House Bay. The original house burnt down some years later, and in 1925, the second Red House was built, which is the property on the market at the moment, or it's on the market at the moment. We often think of the Red House as a private residential property that has always been separate from the activities that have occurred on Takapaniki. Although for many of these activities and developments, the Red House was part of the greater Takapaniki area. It was over 150 years later from when the first Red House was built in Takapaniki that the current residential property was created through a subdivision in 1997 by the council at the time. My report has only included a snippet of information associated with the historic events of Takapaniki and doesn't give justice to the amount of information associated or the depth of emotion with all the events that have occurred there. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Does anyone have any questions in relation to the information paper? Aaron and Yanni?
Just on one of Rick's final points around writing to the Minister and Prime Minister around contribution as well, is that in play, or does that need to be in our resolution today to be in play?
That's the first I've heard of it as of just now, so no, we haven't got anything in play at the moment.
Okay, so the question would be to you, can we add something in today?
We certainly can, but it's sort of kind of dependent on the decision. But regardless of it, the decision, I guess that it would be worthwhile to note it here.
Yes, note it here, and then use it in the other decision.
Yeah. So
thank you.
If somebody would like to draft up some words that just simply acknowledge. I mean, I was going to deal with it in the next paper. I think it's a very good point that no matter what, we will want to write to the Minister and the Associate Minister with respect to an assistance with the purchase. Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. Just reading through the conservation plan, the chronology really signals that this was a place where it was thought, I think, that the Crown would try and acquire it. So the previous Banks Peninsula District Council were looking to sell it to the Crown, and I guess private place be acquired by the Crown. So I just was trying to understand, in terms of where we've got to today, whether there's been any discussion with central government agencies about actually taking ownership or partnership around the site.
I wonder if that is more appropriate in the next meeting to discuss rather than the information here.
Okay, yeah. was just looking at November 2002 where the representatives gathered and it said all parties agreed to work towards the land being secured by central government as a National Historic Reserve and that council should be paid fair market value. So I was just really trying to understand how the difference has occurred, but we can deal with it in the next one. And then I guess the second question really from me is I'm just trying to understand the process for it becoming a National Historic Reserve, because I know that we've done so much work on it.
Yes.
And for those of us that were involved since the start of the reclassification, it feels like it's taken a really long time. So I'm just trying to understand the kind of time frame stages in the process and how we can get that happening sooner rather than later.
Sure. There is an outcome in the Takapuna Reserve Management Plan that there is a policy there that actually does say to apply to central government for national status. Before we certainly, that has been endorsed by the Community Board and the Council as well. Before we can make that application, we need to ensure that we have a good set of documentation that covers not only the past events, but also what we plan for the future of this very significant reserve. And we have been working with a co-governance group, which has been set up through the management plan. We have been working with Unuka Runanga on developing, for example, various documents such as the Cultural Design Framework, which gives a good cultural background to the site and what it actually means to Runanga. So once we have all this documentation developed, then we will make our application as a full application to central government. We would be very hesitant about putting an application at the moment, and if we didn't have this full backing or support, I should say, rather, of the documents.
What I sort of struggle to understand is if the Crown accepted that it's a National Historic Reserve, wouldn't they want to have a partnership around the future of the site? Like, why wouldn't we want them to agree to this first before we do all the work?
There is only, well, I should say, the reserves that are of national significance, or national status rather, at the moment they're all central government owned. There's no territorial reserves that are owned that have national status. So we would be the first when we apply for it. And it's up to the central government or the Ministry of Conservation to consider whether our application is worthy to proceed with that process. So they may turn it down. Our thinking is that to ensure that they can understand the significance of this site, we need to ensure that we have all of the documentation in place. Because I think if we were turned down, it would be very hard to reapply at a later stage.
I think that's a clear answer to the question that's been posed. It certainly has whetted my appetite to know a bit more about what we could do to accelerate that work in order to get that level of confidence that we could make the application, because I think that's been on obviously everyone's minds for a considerable period of time. It's a shame that we're unlikely to see that progress. It would be a good objective to have that progress in this term, because 2022 is 20 years since that commitment was first acknowledged. So maybe that's a very good outcome that we can work towards out of today as well. So I'll just, there are no other questions, were there? James.
I guess it's a question, I'll phrase it this way then. Do you realise that I appreciate what you've done in preparing this paper, Russell? But due to the extraordinary nature and the time-sensitive aspect of this decision that we're coming to today, or this paper, I raised a couple of, as we know, a couple of concerns, and we couldn't amend the paper as it's been tabled. So I wanted, as a matter of record, what has come out as a memo to us as councillors, and I want it on record for this meeting, and that is 3.21 in the paper. This is subsequent to Kemp's deed, and this is really important, which is why I raise it. 1848, Kemp's purchase was signed at Takapuneke, but Tikao, one of our ariki from over on Te Pātaka o Rakai Hautu, would not sign it. They rejected Kemp's purchase. Therefore, that's what I've added to it, to this paper. Therefore, Te Pātaka o Rakai Hautu, Banks Peninsula, was not purchased by Kemp, and the land was illegally occupied by settlers. Ngāi Tahu protested this and other breaches of contract, beginning Te Kereme, the claim, in 1849, the next year, which took almost 150 years to settle. Then the next step is that part of Te Kereme was that the subsequent Akaroa purchase. Oh, by the way, I acknowledge Akaroa Civic Trust for your history on this, but part of Te Kereme was the subsequent Akaroa purchase in 1856, that is 8 years later. It was deemed a forced sale, and it was admitted without argument during the claim, the Ngāi Tahu claim, by the Crown negotiators, and the Waitangi Tribunal had declared that the Crown had acted, quote, unconscionably and in repeated breach of the Treaty of Waitangi. That's one of the reasons we're here today. Then the next step is that Ngāi Tahu, including Ōnuku, wanted to retain Takapuneke as a reserve at the time the Akaroa purchase was signed, but that request was refused. So those are very important aspects of the history of why we are here today. That's the stone in the shoe I was talking about earlier. Kati, full stop.
Kia ora, and thank you for that. I also, I just wanted to say thank you very much for putting this information together, and thank you to those that made deputations. It's, you know, and thank you, James, too, for the correction of the record, you know, in that regard. I also, I think apart from the sort of central government, the treaty issues that this site raises, there is also the local authority, and we have inherited a history of which we should not be proud. So, and that is clearly stated for the record here. And I think decisions that were made in the past would not have been made today, particularly in terms of location of the wastewater plant and the rubbish dump. You know, I mean, just from every perspective, it's that clash of it's just it does bring that into stark relief, and it is something that must be redressed. So that you know, I just wanted to thank you for making it so clear in the dates that you have shown, or the timeline of events that you have really identified the record of a history of which neither can be proud, central government or local government. So I will move that we receive this information and that we write to the Minister and Associate Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage with respect to assistance with securing the Red House and public ownership. And James, would you like to second that motion? Yanni? Yes, Yanni, I'm calling you.
Just want to start off by acknowledging George Tikau. I was very fortunate as a new councillor to be invited to be on a hearings panel in Akaroa for Takapuneke. I'm not sure that many councillors really knew the significance of the site, certainly from the city's point of view, because we'd just amalgamated with Banks Peninsula. So I put my hand up, and when I arrived, I was just overwhelmed with the depth of feeling and emotion and the significance of the site. And I just wanted to acknowledge George Tikau, because he led the start of that hearing, and he also concluded it. And he said it had taken a long time to get to this point, and another 10 or 12 or 20 years was not the issue, as long as it happens, but the sooner the better. And that was, ironically, 12 years ago to this day. or not exactly this day, but to this year. And so I just wanted to stress that that was the awareness and the awakening of this City Council's role in what we do for the site. That was also the first time that this council acknowledged from that hearing panel that we would want to acquire the private property to complete the whole. So I think it's a really important part of the process, and unfortunately it's not recorded in our report today, but I have sent that around all the councillors so that you can be aware of that. Because for me, as a new councillor at the time, it was very apparent that this was an incredibly important and special place, and we needed to treat it with the respect and dignity that it deserved. So I just wanted to acknowledge the people, all the people that have been involved, and also Harry Efferson, and especially also the Civic Trust and all the others. There were so many that have supported the call to do right, and I just wanted to acknowledge those huge efforts that people have made over the years. And just to conclude, I guess that's why I feel such a strong sense of we need to keep moving forward with this. And although I know that we can't achieve everything as soon as we want it, it does seem to me that we should be trying to put more effort into getting it declared as a historic national reserve because of its significance to not just our community and to our city or our region, but actually to all of New Zealand's history. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge our staff for the huge amount of work that's been done to bring the information in this paper and the information in the paper that we're about to consider together in what has been a very short time. I know the huge amount of work that has gone into that, and I see in both papers a very high quality of information which is going to support good decision making today, and I thank everybody involved for that. I'd also like to thank the people that have travelled here to make deputations today as well. The Onuku Runanga representatives, the Akaroa Civic Trust representatives, and the Deputy Chair of the Te Pātaka o Rakiaihutu Community Board. It's not lost on me that these people have travelled from Akaroa in many cases at short notice to make these presentations, which have also been put together in incredible detail, also at very short notice. The passion, the emotion, the strength of feeling around the issues that have led to the matter that we're considering today have also been absolutely evident. We'll consider the substantive matter for good reason in public excluded, but the ability to have this discussion and to hear these powerful presentations in this open part of the meeting has been incredibly valuable, and thank you to everybody involved for providing the opportunity to do that today.
Kia ora. James, did you want to close the debate?
No, look, I think the corridor that we've had this point covers off everything. If we've listened carefully, it is very clear what we should do. It's as simple as that. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Kia ora, thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried.